3, 2, 1.
How
now?
brown
cow.
What took you guys so long?
Why did you take so long to say it?
How now?
Okay, send me those digits.
217.
Hi, this is Sophie.
Oh, the Sophie. Landon.
That almost sounded like the voicemail actually, but it's you.
It did.
Welcome.
Yeah, I'm a little formal, I guess.
This is Mike. You might be familiar with me from several episodes you've listened to.
I'm a big fan.
Just a couple. You've at least listened to one. We'll give you that.
I've listened to like 5.
Oh, all right.
Oh, wow.
I didn't want to assume.
Sophie, my name
guys
is
need a
Ross.
lot of help.
If you've listened to 5 episodes, you've heard me at least 3 times. So nice
Correct.
to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Ross and I were college roommates for 4 years. Mike lived with me in Champaign for a couple years, early granular.
Oh, heck
And
yeah.
so did Matt.
Yeah, so my name's Matt. I mooched Landon's apartment for about 8 weeks during a clinical rotation in PT school.
Sophie, can you introduce yourself relative to Landon?
Yeah, I'm Sophie. I worked with Landon at Granular, and we both went to U of I, although we didn't know each other there, but had the pleasure of starting up the Champaign Granular office with Landon.
We did indeed.
Okay, and you're still at Granular?
No, I'm not. I left, I think, like 4 years ago.
Well, we've got, I almost said Sophie's apology, Socrates' apology going on tonight. Landon says you're almost...
His enemy was the sophist. So
you're right.
It kind of I don't think you're a sophist, Sophie, but
you better not be. Can you define sophist, Sophie?
I don't know sophist, but
yeah.
Sophia is referenced.
Landon, where'd you get this girl? Did she even graduate high school?
The only reason we know sophist is because it was the Word on Fire podcast. I didn't really come across that term outside of that other reference, but well, they were the people who judged him, the Pharisees of the Socratic Athenian lands.
You could imagine them as like a modern day slimy lawyer. They're just out to win rather than the truth.
Yeah.
That's a good.
They were persuasive, emotional beings.
Yeah. Sophie, what do you know about Socrates' apology? Apologia.
Can I give my recap, or do I have to give a formal one?
No. Your recap. Definitely your recap.
I think it's like the original FU to authority, or like the original challenger to authority. It's like an example of humility, but not. He's super humble in a lot of ways. I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not a poet, I don't know that much. But in the apology, he's extremely, in my opinion, he's extremely like certain of, what is the guy, Miletus or something like that?
Yeah, good.
Wow.
Right.
That is
Wait,
impressive,
hold
Sophie.
on. When are you recalling that name from? From like studying for this phone call or from high school?
Oh no, I re-looked it up.
Oh yeah, okay.
I wish I had that memory, but then he's like certain in his kind of defeat, or his kind of like his conquest via the Socratic method.
And so it's an interesting confidence.
Maybe.
Mike, this is her recap, not yours. Shut up, Mike.
Sorry, I'm man. Keep going, Sophie. You're doing great.
Right now. We're done with it.
I think that's all I got. I think that's. But my tagline would be like the original challenger to authority.
Good work, Sophie.
Thank you so much.
Sophie, have you ever been in a position where you had to produce some sort of apology like Socrates?
Ooh, weekly. No, I'm just kidding. I think you'd have to be a lot more important than me to have that type of apology in a lifetime.
Oh, that humility that I hear rippling across the phone sounds like you might have just the sort of soul dust that Socrates had, though.
Oh my gosh, if I have a percentage of his ability to banter, what is the word? What is kind of the meat of what he does? I mean, he makes him look like a fool in the most respectful way. And that's a really great skill.
He's an interlocutor.
I don't know that word.
Landon and Sophie, do you guys have any special memory of working together that you'd like to share with the Speech Guys audience?
Landon, you might have to do this. My memory is escaping me. Did we have any good times?
Just maybe share how you first tried to recruit a bunch of engineers in Research Park.
I mean, I just spammed people.
You also held a yoga session.
Oh my God, I did. Yeah, but that didn't work. Zero yield from that.
Oh, we all know that's not true. Sophie, do you know how to do an introduction for the Speech Guys?
I think so.
And if you fail, we're going to sentence you to death by hemlock poison.
Seems appropriate.
Okay, Sophie, thanks for joining us. And we're going to let you take over here, introduce the episode, and make it your own.
All right, this is Socrates' Apology. It's the final for Speeches for Prisoners. And this is given to you by Mike, Matt, Ross, and Landon.
Nice. Love it. Although I will correct, it's not Speeches for Prisoners. It's anyone can listen to it. It's by prisoners.
That's why
I think for prisoners might be better.
Yeah. Hey, let's cue the music. Thanks for doing this, Sophie.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Michael Schaefer, Ross Johnson, Matt Schultz, and Landon Fry are all here.
It's free.
I'm just gonna say it. I've been thinking it for 10 minutes. I'm on a podcast here.
Oh yeah.
Pregnancy is a beautiful thing. Pregnancy is a gift.
What kind of
paint sticks to asteroids? Like, if you don't prime your walls.
Some days, but the road will lead us to a better place.
We are called to emerge from that default setting of self-involvement.
Okay. Receiving that introduction, catching that long toss from Sophie. She did a great job, and she's right. This is the last episode, the Speeches by a Prisoner series.
Yeah, we're going to the beginning of the Western canon as we know it, the spark of Western literature, of the written language, and it starts with philosophy and a man named Socrates in a city called Athens. 399 BC, 400 years before Christ. We're going to skip to the end of his apology. He is in prison. He is on trial, and he is being accused of several things. We'll get into that and can break it down, but I'll start out with a quote. And if I say exile, and this may possibly be the penalty which you affix, I must indeed be blinded by the love of life. If I am so irrational as to expect that when you, who are my own citizens, cannot endure my discourses and words, and have found them to be so grievous and odious that you will have no more of them, others are likely to endure me. No, indeed, men of Athens, that's not very likely. And what a life should I lead at my age, wandering from city to city, ever changing my place of exile and always being driven out. For I am quite sure that wherever I go, there is here, the young men will flock to me. And if I drive them away, their elders will drive me out at their request. And if I let them come, their fathers and friends will drive me out for their sakes. Some will say, yes, Socrates, but you cannot hold your tongue. And then you may go into a foreign city and no one will interfere with you. Now I have great difficulty in making you understand my answer to this. For if I tell you that to do as you say would be a disobedience to the God, and therefore that I can't hold my tongue, will you not believe that I am serious? And if I say again that daily discourse about virtue and of those other things about which you hear me examining myself and others is the greatest good of man, and that the unexamined life is not worth living, you are still less likely to believe me. Yet I say what is true, along a thing of which it is hard for me to persuade you. Also, I have never been accustomed to think that I deserve to suffer any harm. And I'll end with the difficulty, my friends, is not to avoid death, but to avoid unrighteousness, for that runs faster than death. Words by Socrates, just basically a little bit of context around his most infamous phrase attributed to him via Plato: the unexamined life is not worth living. First reactions on the text, the speech. Did I pick the best part?
Mate, before first reactions, can we set up the context a little bit more? You said rightly 400 BC, right? But like, where does this document come from?
Not Socrates, but Plato.
Right.
Plato.
Right, so his student. Okay, so Plato wrote this. Presumably he was there at this trial. And what was he officially being accused of?
Corrupting the minds of the Athens youth and not worshiping the gods of Athens. Were two things, perhaps a third or fourth.
And like being a general like rabble rouser. Yeah, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anything else? He was 70 years old. I think that's sufficient. And the stakes here for this trial, if he's convicted guilty or determined guilty of those accusations, is death by poison.
Yes.
So
yes.
Okay, that's what's stakes here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's one line that was in the quote or in the section that you read, Landon. That's one like I've always kept with me, I guess. The difficult thing is not to avoid death, but unrighteousness. For unrighteousness runs faster than death.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Just being a father for the first time, or reading this for the first time as a father, I think you realize your own unrighteousness differently.
Mm-hmm.
And how easy it is for you to just kind of settle into things that are just, easy, convenient, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
I know we've mentioned this dynamic to some degree, but, like, oh, yeah, I'd give my life for my family. But it's like, would I give up this one thing for the evening for my family,
That's right. Matt has birthed a child since our last podcast episode.
Matt hasn't.
Yeah,
his
hasn't
wife
been.
has.
I haven't. Claire would take exception to that. But yes, my wife, my beautiful, wonderful wife, has birthed our second son, Joseph P.O. Schultz. So,
First thoughts or first reaction, kind of like nothing specific in terms of, oh, this line was cool, but more I feel like a little bit of a broad thought. Just, I think the sense that it doesn't feel when you read it that he's more, I feel like, defending himself in terms of like he didn't really think he was doing anything wrong, obviously, as opposed to like trying to get himself off the hook, if that makes sense. So I just feel like if I was on trial, it seems like my motivation would be like avoiding the guilty verdict of death, right? And not that you would like, I would lie about it, but like that, seeming like that would be my primary focus, where his doesn't seem to be that. When you read it, it definitely seems to be straight up just defending himself that he didn't do anything wrong, if that makes sense. And I mean, he explains why, if you read it, his death doesn't seem to bother him as much in a lot of ways, or have, I think it would a lot of people. So maybe that's part of why that didn't seem to be his primary concern. But I feel like just reading it, I mean, it's been a while since I've read it. So, I mean, I could have given you at least the context and the general ideas of it, I think, but just reading it again, that I think is kind of my first reaction.
I don't know if I've ever read this speech in completeness, but I was very familiar with it. But I actually have read the sequel to this speech. What is that called?
Is that the
Fido?
The Meno? I thought it was the Meno. It could be the Fido.
Some
he's in
funny
prison and his
word.
friends are trying to convince him to break out of
prison.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Also written by Plato.
The sequel or the prequel? It had to have been before.
The sequel.
No, that was after he was condemned to death.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
He spent about a month in prison awaiting execution. And one of the interesting tidbits I read was how, like, and this sort of just emphasizes Ross's point, of his extraordinary, perhaps foolish, maybe, I'm not necessarily that, but devotion to integrity, I suppose, is his accusers in the court, in the trial. They basically wanted him to escape while he was in prison. Like, they apparently made it very easy for him, but he refused. Anyway, but yeah, I have read the sequel, which is interesting. Among the things in the sequel is how Socrates believed in people who dwelled at the bottom of the ocean. There were a couple of other really funny sounding things. I mean, there's other mostly noble and interesting things, but still. One thing that stuck out to me, realizing that this was 400 BC. This was 400 years before Jesus came around. This is so crazy long ago. But despite that, the characters in this story, not in the sense that it's fictional, but just in this dynamic, they're all like people that we can imagine. Like, they're all the same kinds of people who exist today, which is crazy when you think about that. And I think that your average high school student who'd be reading this, that's just not going to be fully appreciated unless they have just a fantastic teacher. Another thing that stuck out to me, which I think that we're going to get to later, is just the uncanny parallels between the nature of the person on trial and the trial itself and the trial of Christ. Really, really interesting and extraordinary, really, when you think about it. And anything else to do? Yeah, I think that covers my first reactions there. Landon, what about you? What made you pick this speech?
I do kind of always take a glance at like the oldest work possible in whatever potential category we have. And this fit that description. I know, and we read this camping one time, right? Is that correct?
We did, yeah.
So,
November 2019.
I think we should tell the full story.
Yep.
Because Mike
Jim Edgar
asked us to memorize lines of the speech, and I was the only one who had one memorized.
Matt, we're busy. We don't have time for frivolous nonsense like that.
No, I think I barely remember. I don't think I read it a ton before driving up to Jim Edgar. It is very hard to read. I don't think reading through it, like the interpretations of it and the surrounding material of the context and the description of the various characters he's talking about, helps you visualize it a lot more. than simply reading it. It was a harder read than I expected. And yeah, it is 400 years before Christ. I mean, you look up what philosophy or what written figures were before that, Thales, like people that you definitely have not heard of. And I don't know, this kind of sparks Western civilization. As Sophie said, like Socrates was the first person to kind of thumb his nose at the system, or another way to put that the what has been defined by him, the Socratic method, is to get down to the logos, the logic, the reason, the logos being the truth of the matter, and perhaps infinitely questioning it until you're at a first principle or the truth. And so Socrates, from a secular perspective, questioned and pushed back against a lot of the mythology and the many gods and the first version of democracy, half tribal, half democratic, political, mythological culture, by just questioning everything. And that questioning led him to where he's at, but like invented logic and tried to help people find the truth of the matter.
Maybe we can sort of begin breaking apart some of his accusations a little bit. And one thing I did not know before this contemporary visit of the speech is how, like, yeah, he was on trial for these particular reasons that we've already stated. But as I understand it, there was also this dynamic going on with the, three particular individuals who are referenced in this speech that are sort of his accusers, who were part of the oligarchy or the old democracy, and they did not, and Socrates was basically anti-democracy, which we can sort of explore a little bit. But is that general dynamic right? Or
Yeah, so there is, I forget, is it like the 30? So Peloponnesian War happens.
Yeah. Yep.
Sparta
Well,
takes-
well, there's old democracy
Sure.
of Athens.
Yeah.
Then the 20 crazy long year Peloponnesian War. Then new democracy, which is a lot different apparently than old democracy. Okay.
Yeah. But basically, you end up with this 30, like kind of in the immediate wake of the Peloponnesian War, you have the 30-man group oligarchy, and then that's what gets overthrown, right? So but some of like the new democracy are kind of there are some remnants from that 30-man whatever oligarchy thing. So it's a little bit of like a kind of a shady mix of people. But yeah, so people who may not be authentically interested in democracy.
But Socrates doesn't like democracy, so that
He's skeptical.
The fine point
he's skeptical.
The fine point you put on that explanation does not quite make sense. But what's important here?
I don't think I read that. Yeah, I'm interested. I don't think I read that super clearly. How does he not like democracy, and what is his solution?
Well, from what I understand it, is that, and I mean, we can understand this idea. The idea is that democracy leads to just inherently to populism, right? That the average person is just incapable of just selecting the best person. They're going to select based upon whatever nonsense factors. So the ideal government for Plato or Socrates was basically like a meritocracy where the government leaders are trained in the discipline to govern, and they govern completely full time. That's basically the idea. But the point is, like, they're trained and selected in it.
I guess Plato's Republic is kind of where a lot of that's fleshed out. It's hard to be really systematic about Plato or Socrates. just because Socrates didn't write anything and Plato wrote in, just more in like dialogue form. So it's hard to tell as much if it's a systematic, like he didn't systematically lay out a system of beliefs and in politics and whatnot. But yeah, he was certainly critical. You'd have to read like the Republic, and there's a lot of I would say like very interesting things that Plato, via the mouthpiece of Socrates in the dialogue, kind of throws out there that it's hard to know if he's for sure being honest or not, in terms of if that's what he thinks should be the case, or if that's kind of a satirical, I don't know. But anyway, that's for a different podcast maybe. But either way, he is skeptical of democracy for sure because of it. And I think Solzhenitsyn kind of had a similar thing, just kind of a tyranny of the mob or tyranny of fashion or.
Right. I mean, when we think of like ancient Greece, right, we think of like many gods, right? This is like where Zeus is coming into the scene here. And I guess maybe this does sort of connect with being laying a certain theological groundwork for Christ, right? So obviously he references, and what this is just interesting how it's worded. He references not God, but like the God, right? Just getting at this idea that there is just one God that exists. I don't know if he doesn't exactly explain like why he thinks that there's only one God. And maybe this connects, Matt, to maybe something you learned in seminary, but like why does that seem like a certain just more rational idea that there's just one God versus many gods?
Yeah, he always, when he was referring to his own perspective, he would just use God in the singular, and wherever he used it in the plural, he's kind of like mocking the Athenian viewpoint. I mean, I think for him, God is the right answer, the logos, truth, all of the mythology around the many gods is not based on that truth. I don't think he ever provided a reason between them other than he was acting in his living the most truthful to himself.
So I've got two ideas if you guys
Go shoot.
Don't have anything. One, so I'm sure Matt remembers from seminary, Occam's razor.
Sure. Yeah.
That's it.
Why don't you define Occam's? Okay, so maybe how would you see Occam's razor fitting into the idea of just one God?
I guess Occam's razor is just the idea that if there are two answers, one of which is rather simple and the other is complex and requires a lot of mental gymnastics, like you should defer to the answer that's simpler.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the simplest answer tends to be the one that's correct, right? Reality is not a Rube Goldberg machine, right? And so I think that is a certain like natural sort of like vision, if natural rational vision, if you will, towards the idea of like one God existing, like within this individual is somehow bound all of these immaterial properties of reality, which sort of connects with his idea of like the theory of the forms, right? The idea that, look, we observe this mathematical reality, we observe like some sort of sense of the transcendentals, truth, beauty, justice, goodness. They must exist in some perfect embodiment somewhere, and so they must exist in a God, not like partly distributed among 500 Greek gods or something, right? So that's not exactly like a proof, but it does, like, one does feel certainly like rationally moved in that sort of direction. The other reason, let's see, by his description of, I guess you would say, the activity of his conscience. like, you certainly don't get the impression that it was like explicitly supernatural or anything, but the extent to which he describes the prominence of its activity within himself and his dedication to following it is not just admirable, but just like really, really striking, right? Especially in today's culture where it's like conscience. I mean, how often is that even brought up, like on Sesame Street, right? Like, oh, do what your conscience says something. Um, and so that idea of one's conscience, of some like not altogether crazy to suspect that, look, this inner voice seems to say things about right and wrong. Life is generally better when I do the right thing that it says to do. Like, its character doesn't have the character of 500 Greek gods going on in some sort of chaos inside of me, but rather it's the character of this one being inside of me, right? In some sort of capacity. I would sort of like speculate is where that natural, rational sort of idea for a single god might come from, that maybe he was coming from, and sort of ties with some of his other thought.
I don't recall him making specific arguments that there is only one God, though. I don't think he argues for monotheism in this speech, correct?
Well, but I feel like he sort of goes back and forth. Well, yeah, and maybe this is up for debate, but I sort of feel like he does, because the one Meletus or whoever it was says that you're an atheist. Well,
Yeah, I don't think he. I mean, it's certainly, and that's kind of one of the tricky parts of the dialogues, is because Socrates, well, Plato via the mouthpiece of Socrates, kind of entertains a lot of arguments to the point where you're not sure what Plato is / Socrates is for sure saying versus what are they just like tossing around. I know that I want to say the word that sometimes gets translated as God is the word daimon or daemon, or which means like it's where we get the word demon from, but like it means spirit basically. I don't know if it necessarily means God in the way we would say God, but also like Greeks probably wouldn't. I mean, yeah, they didn't at least at this point have like a concept of a monotheistic God like we do. So like, yeah, like like Socrates' daimon or whatever he's referring to there, like is different, than it's not Athena, So anything that's not Athena is, a problem for them. So, but either way, it is. I think that the thing that strikes me about that element is just more or less that there's an abstract truth that he's willing to let dictate everything, that he's surrendering to, which I think that certainly like kind of alludes to like our notion of God, right? Like there's one God that, like, but there's this one thing, I know Landon, you referred to like logos and the logos, the truth, all these different kind of iterations of like the one thing that Socrates like is submissive to and subservient of and like will not compromise on, and it's something abstract, but like for him it is so real, which that's I don't know, I guess that's just like a really moving thing, and I think that's kind of what maybe gets to or I guess that's probably a big bridge to like the Jesus comparisons in terms of like Jesus's trial.
Well, Matt, what you said makes a lot of sense, but I think that it's not clear exactly what he thinks about God or, that type of thing, but I feel like it is definitely clear that what he thinks is very different from like the Greeks at the time. He doesn't say Athena. So like even at this very last thing, I to die and you to live, which is better, God only knows, right? So he doesn't talk about Zeus or Athena or any other of these Greek gods. So it does seem to be more this principle, this abstract idea that he really believes in and is literally willing to die for, marks a very big change, I kind of thought that was interesting in the Peter Kraft lecture that I listened to, just how Socrates and then Christ kind of bring us, or brought the West, if you will, kind of away from mythology, these pagan religious ideas, and then kind of got, he used the term married, but kind of marred together, in what we kind of consider the Western world for a long time.
So this is sort of a nice segue from the first accusation to the second. I was also struck by, as I didn't really remember the nature of it, the Oracle of Delphi that he makes reference to, or the Pythia. Did you guys read the Wikipedia page for the Oracle?
I didn't read the whole thing, but I read maybe the first few paragraphs, and then and I kept your comment in mind, and I was just like, holy smokes, that is freaking
Yeah,
weird.
it's so weird. It's like something straight from the movie 300 that you would have thought they made up. But right, the idea, and this is very well documented. This definitely, the temple, you can look up where this temple was, but there was a priestess who dwelled in this seemingly like somewhat off to the rural area place, and she would make prophecies about stuff, obviously, and try to speak wise things. And Socrates apparently did come to her, and she told him that you are the wisest one in Athens, right? And a little bit more like the details of this oracle thing, because, yeah, he makes sort of passing reference to it that, yeah, you don't know what to make of it. But it was this temple, and apparently, people speculate that there was some sort of noxious gas which, fissured, went through these different fissures in the building, which resulted in the oracles and the people coming to have these what's I'm looking for, just yeah, exactly, yeah, drug-induced experience, in order to explain the supernatural appropriation that ancient Grecians made with respect to this. And one of the other interesting tidbits I read about this was that there's no, even though it's referenced so much, there's no deep explanation of how women got picked exactly and how they supposedly had these powers. It was just taken for granted, they are magical people, which is really crazy and interesting. And also, if you really think about it, okay, this oracle somehow knew at least one thing very logical and very history shaping, that, hey, Socrates, you're the wisest person in Athens, right? And then Socrates takes that information, believing that it is coming from the god, and he tests that. And he goes out to the best artisan and the best poet and the best politician, his best guess, and he basically engages in his style of, intellectual engagement and tries to poke holes in their thought. And, he basically does poke holes in their thought. You sort of get the vibe that he'd put politicians at the lowest edge, because they tend to, all of them believe that they know a lot. And of course, as Sophie stated when she started, Socrates had this belief that, hey, I actually know nothing. But the poets just had this genius inspiration, not exactly wisdom. So he was basically convinced that, okay, I think I am wiser than them, and obviously the politician. And then the artisans, because they were really good at building chairs and stuff that ancient Grecians used back then, that they, of course, knew how to do everything, right? And so basically, once he's basically convinced that he actually is the wisest, because he's the only one who believes that he does not know anything, but everyone else believes they know everything, that basically is the substance. That is the beginning of wisdom, if you will, that he comes up with, that it is to know nothing. And that idea gives him the confidence to go among the youth and starts preaching, in a sense, maybe one of those parallels to Christ, and stirring things up, and ends up getting on trial for that. So that corrupting of youth. But so what do you guys think about that? The beginning of wisdom is to believe that you know nothing.
Yeah, I think I think connecting that statement from the oracles of Delphi's, we don't know what singular monotheistic god Socrates worshipped, but he did surrender himself to asking more questions and not assuming he knew the answer to them based on maybe the things projected onto him by his education, culture, upbringing, etc., but laying down his own assumptions about that and at least asking more questions. So I think that was his religion of reason.
I think I would definitely agree. I don't know, like how you worded it. I don't know if it was intentional, but like thinking about the idea, the beginning of wisdom is, recognizing you know nothing. I think there's definitely something there. And just to kind of nail it down into some modern right now life, I feel like I kind of started to realize that just, I don't know, just when you hit different, and maybe you guys are different, but I feel like when I hit different life milestones, it's just, I feel like I started to realize I didn't know as much as I thought I did. So, I buy my first house. I don't know, 25, whatever it was. Issue with something, exhaust fan in the bathroom or something in crawl space that just you've never had to deal with before because your parents always did it. And then it's like, well, shoot, I better call my dad because I don't really know how to handle this situation. And I just feel like those types of things come up. Same thing when you know, you have to live with the spouse, have to have kids. I mean, yeah, you go on and on. So, but I feel like I definitely tasted a little bit about that, and I think it definitely has humbled me somewhat. Just coming out of college, kind of thinking you know it all, and you know a lot, but it's just not. Yeah, I don't know, I feel like the point is there, but so I feel like the beginning of wisdom, how you worded it there, and I can take it further if you want, but if you guys want to jump in, I think there's a lot to that point.
I think even just in a professional level too, like there is an era where it's like if a patient asks a question and I didn't really know the answer, I would kind of like not completely make something up, but you just try to answer their question, and you maybe you describe things and you kind of give them this like slippery weird answer that you think kind of gets to it, and they end up being more confused and you look like a fool, and whereas I think just the more I think just embracing the humility of like, yep, it's okay not to know, and be like, I'm not really sure, like, and we don't really know, but this is what I can tell you, and just kind of have that confidence as a professional. I think there's a humility there that makes a huge difference,
Continue drawing out some of the parallels between Socrates and Christ. Something that I've been thinking about like over the past months for some reason. The nature of Christ's apostles and original close following disciples, right? Because the sort of contemporary notion of a Christian is that they're gullible or easily convinced, blah blah blah. And rightly or wrongly, that's just the take. But and so presumably then the idea is that somehow that's what early Christians were. The religion was, yeah. Doing a little thought experiment here, right? It's who did Christ go to collect it or call or summon his apostles or closest disciples, right? Like they were out, normal people doing their jobs, the fishermen and carpenters and tax
I
collectors.
think there's a sod farmer
and doctors
right?
and whatnot, right? The point is that the gullible people, they were all like gambling at the local sorcery's magic shop, right, or something like that, right? They're not just, they're very practical sort of people who don't take any, and I think it's really illustrated well, especially like with Peter in the TV show The Chosen, that they're not people who get pull the fast one on them, right? They sort of have this natural sense that they don't know everything, right? And then you see in sort of Christ, so many times you see Christ just engaging with questions or parables rather than, oh, this is the answer.
Yeah.
This is the, being spoon-fed thing. So anyway, yeah, just another
It was even mentioned in that
there.
Word on Fire podcast with Peter Kreef. Like a long-standing joke in like the rabbinic tradition is like, answering a question with another question, which is clearly related to the Socratic method.
He mentions it there again. Peter Kraft shout out episode, I guess. But possibly two of the most influential people, if not the two, in the West, in the world, right? Just ever, in terms of just what came after them and came from them. So it's just kind of an interesting thought that they didn't ever write anything down. Like, I don't know, just kind of hit me a little bit. Because I feel like, obviously Jesus is kind of on his own there, but with Socrates, and not that I wouldn't have said, oh, he's the biggest or one of the biggest, but I feel like I would have thought of him as a philosopher, right? I would have thought of him, there's Socrates and yeah, just like, yeah, or I would have thrown in 8 other main philosophers that have, impacted the world but just the fact that he never actually wrote anything down. He more started the process of it all.
He's a pretty meek dude. One just tidbit, he was kind of more scruffy guy in the street. I always pictured him more in some like Greek academy, thought he was in an ivory tower coming up with all this stuff passed down to Plato, but no, he was more perhaps like a street preacher. At one point, I think a theological critique of him is like he did not value the body. It was like, don't eat, continue. You should be so thirsty for education and always, getting to old age, still having so many questions and devalued bodily needs, which doesn't quite align with Jesus taught, but certainly not a guy in an ivory tower. Any other similarities?
Right.
Or
he was poor. Although he did have boys, it sounds like. He also sounds like he was a really bad husband and father, since he says that he has neglected them for quite some time now in order to pursue his studies. So the idea of vocation was he did not quite get to that one.
I think he was a son of everyone probably was, but like son of a stonecutter. So he spent a lot of earlier years like in a laboring tradition, like being a carpenter, and then didn't find his way as a educator until his 40s or something. And this speech took place when he was 70. He was not like, there were other people who taught and persuaded, and perhaps they were more of the sophist variety. Like he would not accept income for his teachings, and accepting income for being taught was like a thing in Athenian culture where you could like pay to learn some of the traditions. And
so something that might be interesting to run with a little bit here as we sort of move towards the general direction of the final bell is sort of the legacy of Socratic thought, Greek thought, logic, philosophy as it relates to general Western culture and modern day. Might be able to find a final bell question somewhere in there.
side point. Homer was the 8th century BC, so Iliad and Odyssey were still probably 400 years before this. Homer and his buddy, somebody else, wrote the background for a lot of the Greek mythology. So a lot of work still comes from the Iliad and the Odyssey. That's probably the oldest. Aesop's fables before Socrates, and then it gets to like Socrates. So point of clarification there.
As far as modern day thought, I think, and maybe I was about to say you have Socrates, who has this kind of the idea like using logic, getting down, to the root of it, figuring out these basic ideas, and then, drawing life out of them, or how to live your life. And I was like, I feel like people today, in some sense, might not like that, even if they would say they would, because I feel like a lot of where people seem to draw how they live their life is based on comfort and honestly just the self, just kind of worship of the self, whatever makes me feel good, whatever I want to do right now, all that stuff. But then I started second guessing myself, because I was like, I don't know if I don't think that's necessarily a modern argument against Socrates. I'm sure the people of his day probably made the same exact thing. And the same exact, or not an argument against, but maybe reasons why they weren't keen on accepting it. And I think somebody even put highlighted something. Yeah, there in the speech. What return shall be made to the man who has never had the wit to be idle during his whole life, but has been clueless of blah, 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 wealth, family interests, military offices, speaking the assembly, and then Mike's comment was nothing new under the sun. So I feel like maybe it's more of a rehashing of old dislike of what living out Socrates thought actually leads you to live.
Could you, maybe I wasn't paying attention, can you synthesize your thought one more in a couple sentences?
Yeah, so your question, how does this kind of play to the modern mind, I guess? So first thought, moderns wouldn't like it, because modern minds wouldn't want to actually try to figure out the truth and then live according to it. They would want to say, this is how I want to live, so I'm going to pick the truth, in quotes, that would let me do so.
Yeah, find yours.
That was my point.
Right. Yeah.
Hashtag know your truth, live your truth, you be you. I could just go. I mean, don't stop me, because I could just
keep going.
But then
Keep going.
But then it hit me. I was like, I don't know if that's a modern thought. If that makes sense. I'm sure people back as far as people have been around probably had similar, quote unquote, their truth would have been different. But I feel like that idea of, no, I don't want to have a truth that I base my life on. I want to pick what I want to live. And then, yeah.
I think the fact that he was willing to just abstractly think about those things, because I know, Mike, you made the one point about, I guess, like one of Socrates' critique of the blue collar folks, that they're just kind of this practical mindset, right? They're just kind of what's going to help. And there is a certain logic and truth to that. Like, some things will be financially good for you, other things won't, but I guess just the next level, besides finding something true in this sort of pragmatic sense, it's like, all right, what's absolutely true? And like, why aren't we, and then just kind of what's righteous, what is good, like what are these bigger principles, and then working from there, even, because I think that even some people would be like, oh well, I'm submitting to the truth, and I went to college and I majored in something that would pay back my college loans with, and they're kind of like stuck on this surface level, and you might say like, oh well, I'm just working within the truth, like this sort of just pragmatic truth, I guess. But there's like more depth there that they're missing out on.
I mean, I think that in sort of like referencing what I had said initially, like all of the characters in the trial are recognizable. They still exist today. The find your truth sort of people, it's like, yeah, they seem really loud right now, but yeah, I think that they have always existed. It's just sort of a fluctuation of proportions at different times. and also obviously just the type of media that we use that makes them feel more loud. Yeah, and with what Matt was saying that we haven't really gotten into with, or that we briefly mentioned with the different groups sort of appealing to their own type of reason in order to find happiness in this life, right? Sort of a epistemologist, epistemologist. I always mispronounce that word. Um, yeah, I mean, you definitely, especially in a world where it can just feel so complicated. It just feels so much safer and more comfortable and powerful. You feel very powerful as the guy who can fix anything on a tractor to just apply that same sort of practical thought to your marriage. Like, oh, I don't know why my wife isn't talking to me. I did X, Y, and Z for her. Like, oh, of course. So therefore, right. But rather applying that sort of different sort of lens to things.
This idea of a nice, the beginning of wisdom is understanding you don't know everything. That whole thing. I feel like there has to come a point then, though, the reason I said I think that's true for the beginning of wisdom, I think sometimes that can lead to inaction is not the right word, but that's the word that's coming to my mind. But I feel like there's something in life as an adult, as a man, to be wise, like sometimes you have to act. So to try to like tie it in to make it make sense. I feel like this idea of I don't know anything, that's like that like accepting that is the beginning of wisdom, but then there'll be some instances where you probably actually do know something. So I feel like kind of recognizing, kind of like to Matt's point about as a PT, how to answer that question. I think just recognizing when you do and versus when you don't is just really important. So, and when you don't, to be honest or to just not say anything. But then when you do, to not, have this, this false humility or something like that, if that makes sense. Like I was thinking, like, so when we were on the golf course last weekend, like, I don't know, I hit a ball that was probably not good, and I didn't know where it went because it gets up in the air, and I don't know where it ends up. And Landon just seems to like know where his ball goes. I don't know if he's got like a tracking device in there or what, but you just know where, like, it could go. So I mean, yeah, whatever. So like at one point I was like, hey Landon, did you see my ball go? And I didn't want you to be, I wanted you to be wise there, if that makes sense. Like you're the guy on the golf course. I needed some wisdom. I don't know if that makes sense or not, if that's the best example, but
well, this obviously gets into the dynamic that Sophie was explaining at the start that was really striking to her, is his capacity to be simultaneously agnostic in the general sense of the word, but then also committed. Because, yeah, he does sort of take that agnostic sort of fundamental approach, but he clearly does commit to things because he, drank the hemlock. Hashtag drink the hemlock. Yeah, that is, that sort of dynamic, though. I think that the metaphor, and I was sharing this with Chris on one of our podcast episodes. It's like how, not podcasting scare. I'm not sure if you guys listen to this because I do feel a little self-conscious sharing this, but it's like, how certain are you that when you die that there's going to be basically the Catholic manifestation of things, right? Like that's basically how it is. Like if I were to put money on that, I don't know, 15 to 35% sure. Which is actually crazy high, honestly, when you really think about it. It's like, okay, the likelihood that you think someone died and rose from the dead and all these million other things, right? So that's like in a sense of like the I'm not sure sort of like dynamic there. But I don't take the approach as like, well, it's probably not true, and so therefore I'm going to live as if it's not true. It's like, no, this in a sense is despite it in my mind, like having not like super high probability, like it's not going to rain tomorrow. It is, in a sense, though, the most true thing, right? It singularly occupies this one particular plane of my life in a way that nothing else can or does. I feel like that's sort of like the dynamic that's getting there between that agnosticism, like, well, I don't know, but I have to commit myself to this in order to be true to myself and true to what I observe.
That's an interesting question. I don't know if I've ever. No, I'm just saying. I don't know if I ever put a number on it.
Was he right?
See, that's what I actually
we're
I
all
did
just
catch that in the
jumping all
podcast.
over each other.
Yeah. Oh man, what's the percent?
I remember hearing that, and I remember just thinking, like, yes, I think, but no, also, in the sense of I just don't think with a question like that, and I think maybe this does get into Socrates kind of, I don't know anything, but I'm willing to die for this mentality as well, is I feel like when you asked a question like, to what percent, like, I just don't think that's the right, that's like a mathematical approach, if that
Well,
makes
to
sense. And I
briefly
just,
defend myself, it's like, yeah, it's not a question I would pose in a high school
right.
theology
But
class, but
right, but the reason I think it can make how you think about it, because like to questions outside of something I can write down mathematically, you don't ever say I'm 80% in. It's not a how much are you? It's just a yes or no.
sure.
So like do you love your wife? It's not a
Yeah.
There's just no way to actually do, it's a different type of
Yeah.
question, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. So like to try to take that approach, it's more of a I take in the information, I
Yeah.
think about all this
It's
stuff.
sort of an
Who do I
irrelevant
trust?
question, essentially.
Right. Yeah, so it's kind of like it's not the exact same, but I feel like it's kind of like if your wheels start turning there, it's gonna be kind of like can God make a boulder so big you can't pick it up? Like that's just not an actual question. So the reason I bring it up is because I actually feel, and I think it kind of fits well with the whole like action thing. And I think I shared this a long time ago on a podcast, but even with like when I decided to propose to Julie, like there was never a I'm 50% sure, I'm 60% sure, I'm 90% sure, I'm 100% sure, okay, everything's great. It was more of a you think about it, you talk to people, you pray about it, and then you jump off the cliff. And there's this no other way to put it. So I feel like in this types of questions, it's kind of like that. So I just don't think it's a So anyway, I think that fits Socrates well because I think it's kind of that. I think wraps or kind of shows a little bit of the he's admitting he doesn't know everything, but he is so certain of this he's willing to die for it at the exact same time.
Yeah, it's just a beautiful thing to think about because, like, if you went through life with this sort of probabilistic mathematical, no one has math problems in their love letters, like no one, like it's, but like how often or how easy is it for us to think that way in terms of like our financial decision? It's like, well, should I put this in this one investment thing and save this and do all this math? Or it's like, actually, I'd like, maybe we should just like get a nice home for our family to live in and flourish in, like maybe that, like, not saying that there's no benefits to being prudent, but
Matt is filing for bankruptcy next month.
that's right. If you guys could Venmo me a few bucks, I'm a little short.
We're going to have one last party at his beach house.
Yeah, this random example, but yeah, I think there is more room for that.
I have an idea for the final bell. Not great, but I'll just put it out there.
What percentage do you guys think?
What was Socrates' last words?
One quick offshoot. Do we think the Apostle Paul read any of Socrates? Quick Googles lead you to like
almost guarantee it.
Yeah.
I was gonna say 90% sure yes.
It's hard. A quick Google does not like easily say, of course he did, or of course he didn't. He was a very well educated man. He witnessed in Athens and Corinth, which were all, I think, involved in the Peloponnesian War, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, I think that just the nature of his ministry was probably in response to partly building off of what Socrates had done and said. Do we think Jesus read Plato? Certainly he knew about him.
Do we know Jesus knew Greek?
I've looked that up before. I mean, I think it's
Again, like, of course he did.
He probably,
I mean, he was
he did.
all God and all man, so God knows everything, right?
Well,
I mean, he also. I mean, Jesus didn't know English. Like English hadn't, like,
the man
maybe
part,
it existed
right?
in some way, but yeah. I mean,
but it's the same person. I don't think he knew Greek though. I've looked that up once before though. But
didn't he quote the Septuagint in Greek?
I don't know.
I don't know.
All I know is I know nothing, guys. I'm sorry.
Pretty sure he did. You're so wise, man. So keep talking.
I don't know if this would work for Final Belt, but I know we've talked in some ways as like, oh yeah, like nothing's changed, like nothing new under the sun. You know, people have the same faults they did. You know, like these characters are actually surprisingly relatable. But then on the other hand, we're like, oh yeah, modern people, they just stink. You know, like the modern mindset. You know, so I guess like, was there ever a mindset or like a culture or a group that I don't know. I guess I'm maybe that's not a real question, but
Yeah. As far as normal people, probably not. Craif made an interesting point, kind of like Christendom and this kind of marriage between Socratic philosophy and faith and Christianity. So it's pumping out people like Aquinas and stuff like that. But as far as general populace, probably not.
Right. Yeah, he said it was like two rivers, and it was like reason and religion joined with Christ, separated at Reformation and Enlightenment, and is now back kind of in like a swamp again.
Okay, I've got an idea. You have an examination crisis on your hands. Put yourself in the role of parent or teacher. And your pupil, whether they are your child or student, is having some major life examination issues. They are just licking the icing off the cake without eating the cake. What are you going to do to compel them to examine life just at least one layer deeper? Or a point in your life where someone helped you examine it just one layer deeper. I like that. I mean, you can sort of pick from any combination of those that you feel compelled to.
yeah.
Does that work, guys? Okay, cool. Final bell?
Yeah, Final Bell.
Ding, ding, ding.
Hey, one more round. And there's no stopping this now. This is our round. Don't stop it now. You start, you don't stop. All your strength, all your power, all your love, everything you've got. This is all right there. Do it now. Yeah.
All your sweat, all your power, all your love.
There you guys go. That was good, the last part there. And we're back. Landon, bring us home. We've explored the sophists. We've explored what Socrates was accused of and why he needed Tom Cruise as his lawyer. And now we're finally... I just watched A Few Good Men recently. Great film. And now we're going to touch on that famous quote of his, or claim, that the unexamined life is not worth living.
We are. You have a student. You are Socrates, and a student or your own child has come to you with a decision point, an existential crisis, and you must help them examine their own life. How do you do it? Or if you need another version of that, a point in time where you did sit down and examined your own life, and Socrates was just grilling you with questions. What was that? How did you come out on the other side?
I feel like that's sort of a motley crew of final bell questions, but whatever. I've got something quick and simple here. For a moment that an individual compelled me to examine life one layer deeper. I don't think I've shared this before, but I did write about this in Mel and Grady, now known as Under the Ozark Stars. But when I was helping at a confirmation retreat in high school, junior in high school, and there was an old-ish gentleman who came to like the pizza night for this retreat here. So I was not on the retreat. I was helping like one of the teenage helpers with this retreat. And he was interacting with a table of like 5 or 6 students, conference students who were actually effectively on the retreat to be confirmed. I was not interacting with the table in any way. I was just sort of watching what was going on. And he suddenly makes reference to Samson. And when he, like Samson, Delilah from the Old Testament, and as he's referencing Samson and exclaiming the story, he stretches his arms out, and he's like fairly jacked, and he's sort of wearing a muscle shirt, and he's like bald, and he wears it well, that sort of 60-year-old type guy. And he's pulling his arms in like he's pulling down the pillars like Samson. And that was pretty much it. That's the only thing I remember from that. And I was so struck by that illustration because he was clearly taking the Bible and the Old Testament seriously in such a way, not just with the language, but with his animation, with his zealousness for the hearts of these young boys that he would show up, on Saturday night here with this group. And in my mind, it seemed like he was living it out in this special way too. Like it wasn't just about reading the Bible, but it's like being strong, right? Like having admirable arms. And that was the first time I think I would say that I saw biblical masculinity. And I was just one of these kids, who would sit in, we were in mass every Sunday, and I'd listen to and I've heard other people describe listening to the Bible this way, the readings in the gospel. And there's this sort of like mystique, sort of mysterious way. It's like, I know that these stories all come from the same book, and there's a certain amount of continuity to them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's sort of mystifying to me exactly how they connect. And it's like with this guy, in just a single instant, it all came to life. And it's as if I heard inside of me, it's like, this is a thing to be taken seriously and approached with nobility and with wonder. He does not know who I am. I know what his name is now, but I haven't even seen him since. But that's a person who compelled me most singularly to examine life one layer deeper.
All right. Shout out to Mr. Derwert. I would say it's similar in that it's the simplicity, and that because I don't even remember like in detail the words that were said, but it was a situation. I was like probably a freshman in high school. So I had this wrestling tournament Saturday morning, but we were going up to Wisconsin for the family Christmas party. We were going to wait to leave until the tournament was done, then kind of drive up, whatever. So it was kind of this like boom, boom, one thing after another, just going straight from the tournament to Wisconsin. But we were The family reunion is kind of like morning time or like late morning to my family was helping set up. Anyway, we weren't going to go to mass Sunday morning, so we did the Saturday vigil mass. So we get there just in time for mass, and I was still in my wrestling sweats and whatnot. And I definitely could have changed. Like it would have taken 5 minutes to just change into decent clothes for church. But I was just like, no, whatever. I don't care. And I think I know my mom pushed back some, but I guess I think it just in the chaos of trying to get 4 kids out the door, she was kind of like, whatever. She kind of let it go that time. Normally she wouldn't. Yeah, normally she wouldn't really. But and I was used to my parents pushing back on dressing up for church. They would always insist on that. But I remember getting out of the car, and my grandpa said, "What the hell are you wearing?" It was just very, very blunt and like calling me out and like, "What are you doing? Like, why?" And I was used to hearing like less blunt criticism, but just like my parents just kind of, pushing back like, "Oh, why do we have to? Jesus doesn't care what we wear. Like he loves us anyway," just kind of doing the whole like obnoxious teenager, but just hearing one, like just the direct and like my grandpa was upset about it. Like he just was not happy with how I was approaching that. No, look, walking into church, like I know he said a few more things to me, and I can't remember. Yeah, I just don't know what he said. But like I remember that was like, oh crap, like this is a serious thing. Yeah, this isn't something you just wear your sweats to. It was about that time. Like I don't know if that was the thing, but it was about that time that I started like, because it was, I guess I was in like confirmation prep and stuff at the time. It was about the time where I started like thinking more and deciding like, hey, if I'm going to do this, I should do it. The faith thing. So
you certainly wonder, I think, a lot, like just how many opportunities are missed by us, just like your grandpa did, breaking out of that just, the motions. Obviously, there's a lot of people who like that's not going to land, but there's so many people like for you where it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, you're right. Like, what am I doing?
Need more grandpas.
For that question you asked, like student comes, son comes, or child comes, or whatever it was, like what do you do? I heard something. I know. I was thinking when you asked that question, I was like, well, I think I don't know, I was just like picturing myself talking to my son, I guess, at the kitchen table. And my first thought was like, oh, I'd offer this advice and teach him. And then it's like, a step back. It's like, okay, the question thing came up a lot, right? Ask questions. And we mentioned earlier, like, right, ask like kind of the joke, like answering a question with the question. But I heard it, I think it was a Bishop Barron May sermon once or something, but I don't remember the context of it, but it was like, you need to ask, what do you really want? And what are you afraid of? And I just remember thinking, like, if you could get someone, and they don't have to tell you, like, if you could get someone to honestly answer those 2 questions, like, what do you actually want? And then what are you afraid of? I don't know, I feel like that would help if when people come to you for advice or whatnot, that would probably help a lot. So that, I don't know, maybe I'll try to practice that with my children more. But yeah, to bounce off Matt and then the bluntness comment. I mean, Mike has called me out before on something. I won't share the details now, but he's called me out on something before. But the thing I was really thinking of as we were talking about this question, I very distinctly remember I was a senior in college, I think, and someone had done something, and I was very hurt by it, and I very much felt, I guess, I think victimized, but in just kind of a childish, pitiful way, looking back. And I mean, I had been hurt, but I think just how much I let it impact me and how I was handling it and blah, blah, blah. And I remember, speaking of like sometimes we just need the blunt response. I went to pretty much 2 people with this question and got pretty much the exact same response. And it was Andy Meister. And sad to say, I don't remember which priest, but one of the priests at the Newman Center. And they both pretty much just didn't even entertain my whining and we're just like, man up is the only thing I remember from like both conversations. I remember it struck me like they both told me the exact same thing. I don't know if for people that, I think the priest one might even have been in the context of a confession, which I feel like normally you just get the like, I don't know, but your guys' experience, but I feel like typically it's just very, and not in a bad way, I'm not saying this is wrong, but just very soft, well, thank you, Jesus loves you, that type of thing. So like to get such a blunt response, I think was kind of out of the ordinary. And I remember just the way that him and then Andy had responded to me, just really talking about like examining life one level deeper. I mean, the bluntness of their responses absolutely made me second or think more about that entire situation, and I'm very grateful for it.
So I will quote when a couple things, kind of a little bit of a theme of this summer for me that I'll share here. And quote that Matt highlighted that I read at the beginning of the episode: "The difficulty, my friends, is not to avoid death, but to avoid unrighteousness, for that runs faster than death." Um, a person in my life, I have met him, whose work influenced me to examine life a little deeper, a part of life, would be Wendell Berry. Started reading his books a few years ago. A little bit more of a vocational aspect of my life. He writes a vast body of work questioning agriculture and perhaps modern consumerist economic concerns, both fiction, nonfiction, poetry. One particular, he wrote this big book in the 70s, kind of critiquing big ag, corporate ag, whatnot. And he had a little debate with the Secretary of Ag, Earl Butz. And one little contention point that they had was Earl bragged about just, how long the life expectancy was. We live till 70 now instead of 62. And going in Wendell's response was like, well, that's great, but like, what are we giving up? Like, isn't this a question of values? When you think of how would you sit down with your son and ask, like, question them through a line of thinking, you would try to like perhaps suss out like what are their values and how can you get them to confront those and then perhaps make the decision off of their, perhaps the shared logos, the truth you have with them or imparted on them, but at least get them to confront that truth. To tie that back, just he questioned Earl Butz. He's like, who cares like what the life expectancy is? What are we giving up in terms of like community and how we work with each other and how much life there is in our time on earth? And it kind of just ties back into, how well are you living? And Socrates hit on that a little bit. Bigger picture, Wendell has some great works. I read a few more of his books. He technically, I think he is the father of like the modern organic movement for farming, and he just has a very yeomanistic view of how tightly communities and cultures kind of used to be together that were obviously broken apart for many reasons due to technological advances and whatnot. But after reading all those, I did write him a few letters and sat down and met with both him and his wife this summer for a few hours and kind of heard a lot of his teachings in person, and would definitely consider him a bit current day agriculture Socrates. He asks and critiques a lot and asks many questions. His solutions are, kind of basic. A lot of his solutions are just like keep questioning it and boil it down to like what is most valued. If it's community, if it's relying on each other, if it's loving each other, it's probably less and less about being so consumeristic and producing food or valuing the people who produce food. Some simple things like that, but definitely has prompted me to peel back a layer on vocational matters in life.
Okay. It's been a heck of a Speeches by a Prisoner series. It's been a long journey, I feel like, going from Denzel down here to
That was
Socrates.
a good one. That was a good one.
What do we got going on for our next, thank you, yeah, next speech series? I've got my vote. My vote is Speeches from the 80s.
We have a motion on the table for Speeches from the 80s. Do we have any other motion?
Yeah, 1980s. Yeah, speeches from the 1980s. Rocky.
Hold on. Fictional or real?
We're gonna have 4 more Rocky speeches.
Just about to say, Mike's got so many movies he wants to do right now.
Yep. Books. Could do books written in the 80s.
Deal.
All right. I guess.
All in favor, say aye.
Cool. Ross,
Done.
are you up first?
80s.
Opposed.
Aye.
I'll have a speech out by, give me 1 week to get it put out.
Fantastic. Coming up next time, Ross, speeches from the 1980s. It's been great. Thanks for drinking.
And thinking.
Be safe out there.
Oh, and drink with us, by the way, too. Hey, cue the music one last time.